if you could trace the history of the nuclear disarmament movement, right from the start, just for people who really know very little about it or nothing about it.
The history of the nuclear disarmament movement?
Yes, can you, well, yes.
Well, actually, I think in one sense it started in August 1945, because there were people like Clement Attlee, whose memoir said, we've now got to abolish war, because this weapon makes war impossible. And that was in a memo in about 25 of August 1945, only 2 weeks after the bomb had been dropped. He wrote that down. So there was a lot of people then who realized that war was changing its nature. In terms of public opposition, well, there were scientists like Joseph Rotblat, who resigned rather than work on the bomb once he heard in 1944, once he heard that the bomb was going to be dropped on Japanese cities. He said, well, not with my help, and he wouldn't continue work. I don't know about organised kind of people's protest. I think in this country it was slow to start because we weren't told what we were doing. It was only secretly that Attlee and Bevan agreed to go on with the bomb in 1947. And it only came out in Parliament sometime in the 50s. So people were not aware what was happening. But by the time of 56 and 57, there was quite an active protest movement, especially about nuclear testing, because people realized that this was a terrible way of polluting the atmosphere and so on. And in fact, CND grew out of an anti-test movement of 56 or 7, and they had already planned an Aldermaston March in 1958, and I think it was who was it? Canon Collins and others had a meeting with Kingsley Martin was the head of the New Statesman, and they had a meeting in 57, November or something, to talk about the bomb, and suddenly it gelled, and we had this enormous meeting in February of 58, which was called by all these prestigious people. And it filled the Albert Hall, not the Albert Hall, the Central Hall, and filled the Caxton Hall, a number of meetings round about. And that's how CND was born. And then came the first Aldermaston March, which was from London to Aldermaston, 1958. And of course, it was the wrong way to go, because the people are in London, not in Aldermaston. So after that, they took it the other way around. They came from Aldermaston to London. And CND had a very strong presence in this country until about 1964, when Harold Wilson was elected, and he was elected on a programme of not getting on with nuclear weapons. But like other politicians whom I won't name in polite company, once he got into power, he said, oh, well, it's all gone too far now, we'll continue. And it was a great discouragement to CND. And a lot of activists were then involved in the Vietnam War and other organisations like that and campaigns. And so CND went really downhill until about 1980, when it took off in a fantastic way. That's when really I came in as secretary of CND. Not that I caused the revival, but the revival was caused by outside factors.
What were the outside factors that caused this great revival in 1980?
Well, first of all, the incredible language that was being used by people like President Reagan about the Soviet Union, and the language of military people. I remember an American general saying, if you're stupid enough, we'll fight World War III in Europe. Then there was a question of having Trident submarines. I think probably the greatest thing that set things off was the cruise missile campaign. The Americans wanted land-based missiles based in Greenham Common that would trail around the country at times of emergency and be fired at the Soviet Union. And people thought, well, nuclear weapons under a submarine at sea, that's one thing. But travelling around Hampshire and Dorset with American commander, no. And that took off. And then we had the amazing women's demonstration, the Greenham Common Peace Camp, which was so brave and so persistent. And I think that helped to focus it. But actually, I think the one thing that did more than anything else to wake people up was our own government. Because our own government put out a report called Protect and Survive in 1980 or 81. And it told you, if there's a nuclear war, well, by saying that, they're saying nuclear deterrence is not certain. If there's a nuclear war, what do? You hide under the stairs for 14 days, paint your windows white, make sure you've got some groceries under the stairs with you, take in 2 plastic bags for sanitary purposes. Can you imagine? Sanitary purposes. And this was ridiculed up and down the country. People realised the government was gambling with our future in a completely ridiculous fashion. I remember when I first wrote a letter to the Times about the fact that bishops were blessing nuclear submarines. I got all sorts of letters back, including one in the Times from another bishop. He said, "I assure Monsignor," as I was then, Monsignor Kent, "that if we ever use nuclear weapons, it will be in all charity." I thought, does he know what he's talking about? How can you use a nuclear weapon in charity? So it was a kind of strange church-state mix-up going on. So all these things kind of came together. And CND, when I got to CND in secretary in January of 1980, I think we had about 4,000 members. All their names were on cards, no computers then, on cards. And as I began to look through the cards, I found about a third of those were dead. So I realised I had a very small organisation. But within 2 years, we had national members of well over 100,000 and local region groups starting up all over the place. So I don't understand the chemistry of public opinion, but it suddenly took off. People realised that nuclear war was a real possibility and the means of protecting yourself were utterly stupid. And that really got things going. And it was only when Gorbachev came along in the late 80s and began to look like a sensible human being, and Mrs. Thatcher could even talk to him and so on, that all that incredible climate of tension between the two great powers began to disappear a bit. And that, of course, then CND began to go downhill again.
How can you explain the fact that nuclear weapons have gone right off the radar?
Well, people have been told that the new threat is terrorism. It is a threat, of course it's a threat, but it's the perfect threat for the militaries because it'll never go away. You've always got a terrorist group somewhere to arm against, to be frightened of, and that's the new thing. What people have never been told is the number of nuclear weapon accidents we've had over the years. Terrifying numbers. I mean, I think really we were lucky. In fact, Robert McNamara, the American Secretary of State for Defense, said that we were saved not by our good judgment, but simply by good luck, both at the Cuba crisis and in 1983, when actually in both situations a Soviet officer decided not to use nuclear weapons when he should have done. And had he done so, he'd have started World War III. So that's one of the things. Accidents are off the agenda. And the other causes, the green movement, environmental movement and so on has come along. But you don't have that kind of language against the Soviet Union that we had in those days. No one's talking about winning nuclear wars. It doesn't mean to say the threat has gone away. We now have 9 nuclear countries, if you include North Korea, 9. Well, there's no reason why we can't have 29, the way we're going. And that by us saying we're going to have nuclear weapons for our security, well, why shouldn't the Iranians have them for their security? And that's the message to the rest of the world. So I think that CND goes up and down, really. I'm not worried about that. I think the message is a moral one and it's a legal one, that you don't fight wars by massacring people elsewhere, and you don't fight, and it's wicked to incinerate whole towns, which is what nuclear weapons are about. So I think you just keep going.